Appreciate it.
Yeah, well.
So if I pause every now and then, it's because I'm having flashbacks. Flashbacks to my days in Catholic school. We went to a school that was not creatively named. It was called Catholic High School. We had De La Sallian brothers who were honchoing our faiths and helping us achieve the futures that we desired. But behind their backs, we called the school something else. We called it Our Lady of Perpetually Delayed Gratification. And I was there for a good while and learned a whole lot. I learned how to wash the bus a lot because that was detention, washing the school bus. And I learned how to run a lot of laps because that was another form of detention. So let's just say I had an eventful, colorful time at Catholic High School in New Iberia, Louisiana. That's where I'm from, New Iberia. I'll talk a little bit about that over the course of the next 3 hours. I'm talking for 3 hours. I'll talk for about 45 minutes. And then what I want to share with you are two basic ideas. One that Kevin already mentioned, investing in the future. Psychologically investing in the future pays off today. Pays off today. And if you can convince the people that you work with that that's the case, then the change process, the growth process is really going to kick off and go like wildfire. The other part that I want you to hear as I talk today is that your hope begets hope in other people. So you can only do your job if you're hopeful. So your first job is to maintain hope in your own life. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that. But first, I want to show you what I would see when I came out of my Catholic church, St. Peter's Catholic Church in New Iberia, Louisiana. We'd walk out the front doors, and just a little bit to the right was a bank, and there was a statue of this gentleman next to the bank. Not a religious figure, but anybody might know who this person is? This is the question and answer part of the session. Just call out some names. Plato? No. Aristotle? No. Socrates? No. Marcus Aurelius? No. All good guesses. Nobody ever gets it, and that's because he's not a well-known figure. It's a trick question. This is Hadrian. He actually was somewhat well-known, built Hadrian's Wall. So he was an emperor of some renown. But this statue was purchased by an owner of the bank in the 1970s. So the story goes, the owner of the bank drove to New Orleans, had a really good time, and came home with a statue. And this is the statue. And he wanted to put it at his house. His wife said no. She said, put it at the bank. So he put it in the bank. And then growing up, when I was a kid, they moved the statue outside because the bank had grown and grown and grown. Now, Hadrian, as you can see, he's holding up something in his left hand and a right hand, and has this hand open. So every Sunday morning when I would come out of church, Hadrian would be adorned with different things that the revelers the night before, the Cajun revelers, had left at his altar. So sometimes he would wear leis around his neck from luau's that people were throwing. Oftentimes he'd have a Jack Daniel's bottle in this hand. And he just seemed to be your crazy uncle, who just kind of showed up and was always dressed differently and kind of crazy. Every now and then they'd put a toga on him, which I thought was so redundant. But that was the case. So at some point, the revelers broke his finger off. And the folks at the bank and a local historian got a little bit concerned. They said, Hadrian has been around a long time. We should get him insured so that if anything like this happens again, we know what to do. So they called in an insurance agent from a nearby town, and the insurance agent said, I really think this is an antiquity. They're like, yeah, we bought it like 30 years ago. And he said, no, this is really old. And they brought in another insurance agent who brought in some experts and found that the Hadrian statue was 2,000 years old. 2,000 years old. So then, as luck would have it, the Louisiana economy tanked soon thereafter, after we found that Hadrian was 2,000 years old. And the bank was having hard times, so guess what they decided to do? Sell Hadrian. Sell Hadrian. So they brought Hadrian to Sotheby's in New York City and sold him for $1 million. $1 million. Now that's the story of Hadrian, which really is the only statue we had in our town of 35,000 people in New Iberia, Louisiana. It was the most beautiful thing we had in our town. And little did we know for a long time, it was the most ancient thing we had in our town, the most beautiful and the most ancient thing we had. And we didn't value him for the longest time until someone else told us how valuable he was. And that's how I think about hope today in our society. It's one of the most beautiful and ancient virtues that we have. And we don't value it the way we could or the way we should. So I'm so excited that you guys are building around this theme of hope for your conference and think it's so appropriate given the Pope's message and given what we know about change and what people need in their lives. So let me tell you a little bit more about what are the hopes and dreams of the world's citizens. So I work at Gallup, and we ask people questions. Have you ever been called by Gallup? Yeah? Did you actually talk to us, or did you hang up? Talk to us? Very nice, very nice. We like that a lot. And some of you are going to Gallup for some strengths work. If you could clap for that. All right, good, good. We're known for something called the Clifton Strengths Finder, which 13 million people have taken. So I encourage you, if you don't know about the Clifton Strengths Finder, to learn more about how it can be part of leading your organization into this new time. But we ask people, what are your hopes and dreams? We went around the world asking people that same question. So Gallup does something called the Gallup World Poll. And we asked people, what are your hopes and dreams? And we came back with two answers that shouldn't be all that surprising to you. I want a good job and a great life. A good job and a great life. So most of the people we work with today, that's what they're seeking. A good job, a meaningful way to spend their time, and a great life with meaning and happiness in it. Now, these are two important goals. There are lots of goals that aren't on this list, and I call them less than salient goals. So we're going to focus on how do you help people achieve a good job and a great life. So we do that through hope. Now let's define hope real quick. And as a psychology researcher, I have to put words to stuff that's kind of fuzzy. So I try to defuzzify things like hope and courage and strength. And so the definition I'll give you may not be your favorite definition of hope, and that's okay. In fact, we're going to talk about how there are different brands of hope. But hope is the belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that you have some power to make it so. Let me say that again, because tonight when you're having drinks and steak, I want you to talk about hope in the right way, okay? Hope is the belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that you have some power to make it so. That's what hope is. That's what we have studied over the last 25, 30 years as psychology researchers. We have found in America that half the people are hopeful and half the people are not. Half the people are hopeful and half the people are not. So let's go back to that definition, the belief that the future will be better than the present and you have some power to make it so. This is where I will get you moving just a little bit. I won't make you dance. Well, I might make you dance, but not yet. So I want you to kind of put your money where your mouth is and talk about where that power to be hopeful comes from. And this is something I do with my students when I teach a course called Positive Psychology. There's a thing called Positive Psychology. And I do the head, heart, holy test of hope. The head, heart, holy test of hope. So in a second, I'm going to ask you to raise both of your hands, and then I'm going to count to 3. And I want you to point to where you think that power of hope comes from. And the head, so mainly cognitive and kind of thinking through rational thoughts of goal setting and pursuing those goals. The heart, mainly emotional, and maybe somewhat spiritual. And then the holy, however you want to signify the holy. You can point up, you can point around, however you want to signify that. But I want to see what your brand of hope is. So everybody have the directions? Okay, I'm not going to make you stand up. Just hold your hands up by your side. All right, you guys do look ridiculous, I have to say. All right. And then on 3, show me where your hope comes from. Head, heart, holy. 1, 2, 3. Now look around. Look around. It's very different. Lots of head, heart, lots of holy. It's very different. So that is your brand of hope. So you don't have to be burdened with precise definitions, but you can know that hope comes from. It's one of these things that we have that's so complex, we can't say it's just a thought pattern, or it's just an emotion, or it's just a spiritual concept. It's all 3. It's all 3. So that's what makes hope so powerful. Now let's talk about why hope matters. And I want to spend the bulk of my time talking about this. First, I'll tell you a story because the power of story is so profound. So we learned that from Kendra's story, which was just beautiful, how this tough-looking woman, had to open up her heart and become even more vulnerable to get the care that she needed. I want to tell you the story of Tara Trent. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Tara Trent. She was Oprah's most popular guest ever. Oprah's most popular guest ever, Tara Trent. So Tara came from Zimbabwe. So she's a friend of mine. Her husband happens to be a master brewer of beer, but that's not why we're friends. Well, sort of. But she came from Zimbabwe with the help of aid agencies to get an education. So she said, kid you not, when she came from Zimbabwe, she said, I'd like to be placed in a place that's similar to Zimbabwe. So they sent her to Oklahoma. You can't make this stuff up. So she went to Oklahoma State University to get her bachelor's degree. And at that time, she was living in squalor. So she had just enough money to get to the States, but as you know, not a lot of people don't have enough money to sustain themselves once they get here. So she somehow made up tuition, was going to school, living in squalor, eating food out of garbage cans behind the local supermarket. And then one of the student affairs workers at Oklahoma State, a guy named Ron Beer, heard about this student, a talented young student who was living with her family in a small mobile home, barely able to make ends meet most days. And he didn't call her. He didn't send someone to check on her. He went to her house. And he introduced himself and he said, there are people who will help you. And he introduced her to Habitat for Humanity, brought her into her church, his church, and gave her a scholarship because she was a deserving student. And this transformed her life. This transformed her life. So she made it through Oklahoma State. She then went to a school in Arkansas and got her master's degree. She then went to a school in Michigan and got her PhD. Now, this is a woman who came from nothing. And her hopes and dreams were to have a great job in a good life. So Tara tells her story to Oprah, and Oprah finds her story fascinating. But Tara had done something really interesting, and it had great production value on the Oprah show. She had written down her goals on a piece of scrap paper, folded it into a tin can, and buried it under a rock where she herded sheep for her family. And then on the show, when Oprah brought her back to Zimbabwe, she was able to find that rock, find that scrap of tin, find that sheet with her goals written on it. And she was able to check off the last one, get a PhD. So from Zimbabwe to America, Tara and I came with the help of many relief agencies. We like to think we do it by ourselves, but we're always partnering with other people in our communities. And with the help of one man who is an intrusive supporter. That's what I think about hopeful caregivers. They don't sit back in the office. They are intrusive supporters of other people. Ron Beer went to her house and found her because he knew she was in need and was able to bring her back to the agency and back to the school and get her the help she needed. So Tara and I, along the way, lost her husband to AIDS and remarried, and Mark he's the beer brewer that I mentioned, and now they live in California, and she is an evaluator for programs that prevent AIDS, and Oprah gave her $1.2 million to build schools in Zimbabwe, because as a young girl in Zimbabwe, she wasn't allowed to go to school. So Oprah wanted her to build her school up and build new schools for girls. So that's the power of hope. But, you know, I love stories. I love Kendra's story. I love Tara's story. But as a researcher, I have to put numbers to it. I have to put numbers to it. So what we've done is we've measured hope around the world. We've measured hope of over 3.5 million grade school and high school, middle school and high school children. And I can tell you, just like with adults, only half of American kids, about 54%, are hopeful. Half are hopeful. But what does that mean? How much does hope matter? Again, I can tell more stories, but we've quantified it. We've done over 50 studies looking at hope in education. And what we found out is that hope is worth a letter grade. So we've paired up students who are of equal intelligence, and the student who is more hopeful will do better than the student that is less hopeful, up to a letter grade better. We also did 50 studies looking at hope in the workforce. And this is for you guys who are running an agency. How hopeful is your workforce? Your workforce, if they're hopeful, will do 1 day a week more work than a workforce that is less hopeful. You get 1 day a week more from the folks who are hopeful than the folks who are less hopeful. But perhaps the most important hope matters finding that we discovered is that hope is worth a 10% bump in well-being. A 10% bump in well-being. Now let me go back to the stats for a little bit. Hope is not related to IQ whatsoever. So you don't want to be caught up in the idea of, oh, this person's really struggling in terms of making sense out of the world, therefore they're not hopeful. That's not the case. That's not the case. So it's not related to IQ, and it's somewhat, and this may catch you off guard, it's somewhat equally distributed across social and economic classes. Somewhat equally distributed across social and economic classes. So you are working with people who have some means, but still made difficult choices in life that got them in trouble. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about the poverty trap. Raise your hand if that's a familiar term, the poverty trap. Okay. Some people use that in everyday conversations about poverty. Nicholas Kristof, who's a columnist for the New York Times, writes about the poverty trap. And what he writes about is that cycle of where someone who is poor becomes lower in self-esteem and lower in hope. Lower in self-esteem and lower in hope. And he just wrote an article that I'm going to recommend to all of you, and you can get on your phone right now and Google it. It's The Power of Hope is Real. The Power of Hope is Real. If you need to go to someone, a funder, and say, we're raising hope in our office, and it's very important, show them this article, The Power of Hope is Real by Nicholas Kristof, Kristof. But what he shares in this article is a little bit about the agencies that are trying to solve the poverty trap through the graduation programs. So these are the agencies that are giving a goat, a chicken, a cow, a duck to the poorest of the poor around the world. Okay, a different kind of work, but meaningful all the same. And what he found out is that if you give a chicken, a cow, a duck, a goat to someone who is very poor, and you give them no training to care for that animal, what happens? They eat it. They eat the animal. They eat the animal. Because that's what they need. They need to meet an immediate need. But if you give them just an hour's worth of training, an hour's worth of time dedicated to learning the power of how to invest in the future, then they actually sustain the animal. And over time, they save money. And that money goes to their children's education, in addition to other things. So that training is hope. That's what he calls it. That's what the researchers called it. Now, these are development economists. I know we have some economists in the room, so I'm not going to say too many bad things about them. But these are development economists. These are not people that use the hope word. It's a 4-letter word to them. They just don't use it. But they said the training is hope. They did another study where they invited the poorest of the poor in, and they showed them 2 videos. One was an inspirational video that had a hopeful message tied to it, and one was a comedy skit. And that was the whole intervention. And then they sent people away and tracked how much money they saved over time. And the people who had seen the inspirational video saved more money over time than the people who experienced little bursts of joy. Now, I'm all for bursts of joy. But the inspirational message is powerful. It's meaningful. It is the stuff of change. Now, raise your hand. I'm doing a lot of audience participation here. If you're a social worker or a psychologist or a counselor. Okay, we are charged with, I'm a psychologist by training, we're charged with making change happen. All the studies that have been done on the common factors of human change brought about by counseling, therapy, and coaching have found one thing consistently, that the installation of hope is imperative to psychological and behavioral change. The installation of hope is imperative to psychological and behavioral change. So are you convinced that hope matters? Now we dance. No. Kevin, I'm not going to make them dance. All right. Investing in the future pays off today. So if you fell asleep 20 minutes ago, I'm just bringing you back to the main message. Investing in the future psychologically pays off today. Now, this is very different. I want to point something out. We learned the principle of compound interest at some point in our lives where we find that investing now financially pays off tomorrow, right? So we believe in that, and our money that's in our retirement accounts are working towards our future. But psychologically, what I need you to hear is that the people we work with need to believe that psychologically investing in the future pays off now. Maybe they don't believe it, but the more you're able to inspire them, the more you're able to give them the hope they need, the more they're able to change today. So that's the core message there. Let's talk about some change strategies. And specifically, I want to talk about goal chasing, ways and will, and when-where plans. How many of you have ever rented a car? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you have rented a car. I hesitate to ask this next question, but I will. How many of you have ever washed a rental car? Thank you, sir. Obviously, I can't say anything negative about you, but I'll pick on somebody else, okay? Raise your hand if you've washed a rental car. Not many people. Not many people. I would say about 10, 12 people, maybe out of 500 people. Why don't you wash a rental car? You pay them to do it. They wash it. Why else? It's not mine. It's not mine. So many social service agencies ask clients to wash rental cars before they get down to the real work that the client is there for. We have to be careful to not assign people goals that don't matter to them. If they're hungry, they need food. If they're homeless, they need shelter. You guys get it. A lot of agencies don't get it. If you're hungry, fill out a form. If you're homeless, wait a few days. Those are the things that you don't do and you can't do. So we don't want to be in the business of washing rental cars. For those of you who work with Catholic schools, my son's at a Catholic school today. His is St. Lawrence, it's Parish of St. Lawrence in Lawrence, Kansas, and it's St. John Elementary School. So hopefully he is not misbehaving like his father did in school when he was young. Pray for him. But goal setting is something that we're all taught to do as change agents. But a hopeful change agent helps someone else do goal chasing. You actually get the person excited about the goal. You make the goal more attainable. You make it more concrete. You make it measurable. You do those SMART goal things, but you also are there shoulder to shoulder, side by side with the client, ready to help them move from point A to point B. So we have to exchange goal setting. Well, we have to exchange washing rental cars for goal setting, and goal setting we have to exchange for goal chasing. With ways and will, you've heard the phrase, where there's a will, there's a way. Well, the other version is true as well. Where there's a way, there is will. So oftentimes, we're working with people who lack willpower to get things done. They lack the willpower to get things done. They're tired. They've been through hard times. They just can't go anymore. They lack the willpower to get things done. What our studies show is that if you teach them the how to get things done, like how to take care of the goat, the chicken, the duck, if you teach them the how to get things done, their will goes up. So if you want to teach hope, you have to teach both the ways and the will, the power to make things better in the future, but also the ways to make those things happen. And finally, in terms of strategies, real simple, and this is folks working directly with clients, you have to create a win-where plan for every goal that you set and chase. So when clients are working on goals, when they're trying to get from point A to point B, they need to make an appointment, a psychological appointment with themselves to work on that goal in the setting that's most conducive to them changing. So those are 3 strategies that you can work with to make sure that hope matters for your clients. Now let's talk about hope begets hope. I want you to think of the most influential leader in your life. Think of the most influential leader in your life. What does that leader give you that makes your life better? Think of 2 or 3 things. What does that leader give you that makes your life better? We asked those questions to 10,000 people at Gallup. And the first time around when we asked those questions, we kind of forgot that some people would say Jesus Christ and God. We were looking for leaders on the ground that you interact with every day. So we kind of forgot. So we were coding these responses. And many people, the most influential leader in their lives, people said Jesus Christ and God. So we coded the rest of the question as well. What are some of the most important things that they give you to make your life better? 4 things popped up. Hope, stability, trust, and compassion. Hope, stability, trust, and compassion. Those are the 4 followers' needs of any leader. Hope, stability, trust, and compassion. So we had to go back and redo the study. Because as much as CEOs think they're godlike, we didn't want them getting confused by our findings. So we said, name the most influential leader in your life that you have personal daily contact with, and thought that would be enough to sort out. I know. We couldn't say not God. So it actually, we got to more responses. We had 10,001 people complete the survey the second time around. That one person was very important. And guess what the 4 followers' needs were when we were looking at regular on-earth leaders? Hope, stability, trust, compassion. People look at us for those 4. I talk to a lot of teachers, and I remind them that you're standing in front of students, and they're looking at you for hope, stability, trust, compassion. I talk to a lot of CEOs and try to get through their heads as well. Followers need hope. Followers need hope. They need stability. Now, what is stability? It's basically being the same person on day 1 as day 2. What you say to one person, you say to the other person. The psychological, emotional side of that is trust. Trust is built on neurochemicals. We build trust with one another neurochemically. So the emotional thing of trust, the emotional need of trust is very biologically based. And then compassion, we actually, and I don't know how you guys parse this word, compassion and love, and when you use which, but we kind of punted on that. The real word that came out in the study that was most popular wasn't compassion, it was love. Even more basic. But we were afraid that the world wasn't ready to hear about your boss loving you. So we backed off of that a little bit. But it really does matter. It really does matter. Now, you may be wondering why I have these adorable penguins on this slide. If I can have that slide back, please. It's not because penguins are hopeful creatures, but I just think they're so doggone cute. But what I want to share is it's a perfect setup for what I need to share with you from the body of psychological research called network science, social network science. And this doesn't have to do with Facebook or Twitter. So the mayor, I know, is tweeting right now about our gathering. But it doesn't have to do with Facebook or Twitter. What it has to do with is the people you contact every day. Okay? So your social network may consist of someone at this table, and then his wife, and then her sister are all in your social network, even though you don't know his wife's sister. Does that make sense? All right. So what we found through social network science is that the hope of the first penguin determines the hope of the 4th penguin. Think about that. The hope you give to the second person, there's your hope, and you give away hope at the beginning of your day. The hope you give to that person influences 2 other people at least. So hope is said to be, much like happiness, powerful to the 3rd degree. To the 3rd degree. So you go from being hopeful to sharing hope with the next person, who shares hope with the next person, who shares hope with the next person, and you don't even know that last person. So when you think about the work that you do, so I was talking to John, and he's got 250 people that work for him here in Omaha, in the diocese. Is that about right? So off the bat, this morning, they shared hope with 250 other people. And then each of those people shared hope with someone else. So from North Omaha, there is this wellspring of hope spreading. That's how hope works. The power of hope is real, says Nicholas Kristof and several articles published in the journal Science. If it's in the journal Science, it sounds important, okay? The power of hope is real, and the extent to which we influence hope in a community is real. So before I wrap up, I have a couple of challenges for you. Number one, can you measure hope across your organization? And the answer is yes. Email me, shane@strengths.org. Shane@strengths.org. I will email you a one-page paper that describes a hope measure that's in the public domain that you don't have to pay for. It's not a consulting thing. It's not a Gallup thing. I'll email you a hope measure, a hope scale for adults that you can use in your work. And you can measure the hope of your staff, and you can measure the hope of the people you serve. And you can track that hope over time. All based on, I think it's eight items, very simple measure, okay? What you'll find is that about half of the people that you know are hopeful, whether they're staff or clients, okay? And about half are not. And then you're gonna have to figure out, how do you raise the hope? How do you raise the hope of your staff, all right? You guys, like many social service agencies, struggle with turnover and burnout. Hope is a preventative to burnout. My mentor did some excellent studies on that work, on that topic long ago. Hope is a preventative to burnout. So that's number one. Number two, who are the hope beacons in your agency, and how can you empower them more? So you're going to have about half of the people in your agency that are high hope, and the other half that are kind of medium to low hope. And then you're going to have these people that shine bright and are super hopeful. How can you empower them more? We had a competition a couple of years ago, and we identified the most hopeful teacher in America, Mary Hawkins Jones. Mary Hawkins Jones. And she was able to inspire hope in her students, in her fellow teachers, in the parents, in the community. So what we said to her principal and her superintendent is, what can you do to get out of the way to let her do more of that? So how can you help people to do more of that? And lastly, how can you lead with more hope? How is you as a leader, how can you find more hope in your own life and give more hope away? One thing I find with leaders of agencies such as yours, you don't necessarily have the broadest social network. That's why this group is so important. I went to the reception last night, and it was just a beautiful gathering of people from across the country sharing ideas and drinks and shrimp. It was delicious. I mean, it was great. So how can you get more hope? I would say to you that all of you need an internal board of directors that's not your board of directors. All of you need 3 or 4 supportive people that you can rely on to borrow hope from when you get a little less hopeful. All right, I got about 2 hours left. Yeah. Once again, if you fell asleep, psychologically investing in the future pays off today, and hope begets hope. I want to leave you with this last quote. It's a quote from Robert F. Kennedy. He is responsible for a lot of hope quotes. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. So a goal from today, if you want to sum it all up, which hopefully you do, is to make ripples of hope. Investing in the future pays off today. Hope begets hope. Hope gets people out of the poverty trap of shame, low self-esteem, and hopelessness. Hope is the stuff of change. And thank you for being the purveyors of change.